I want to talk a little bit about allocation of value because I think that's a big part of what like Bryce and his determines how Bryce would organize his team. Kyle, at what point in time are you guys working on an AOV schedule
I would
in this
say,
process?
yeah, you have a pretty good understanding of what your allocated values are when you make your bid, because your bid's going to derive from, hey, these properties are worth X, and for each specific property, you have the value associated with it. It's really set in stone, through your PSA exhibit. Whenever you guys finalize that with the seller, you both agree, buyer and seller, that each of these properties, and it literally lists each of the properties, whether it's wells or leases or units or whatever it may be, this is the value that we're going to assign to it. And that's really what you use to base, all of your defects off of. And so it's probably one of the more important exhibits as far as the whole process, to really kind of set the stage for the project you're about to embark on.
Is that allocation of value shared with the seller,
Yes.
or
Yeah.
is that an internal buyer?
Yeah. I mean, the buyer might have a slightly different view of what that allocated value is, but generally, the value that you bid is going to be based on that allocated value schedule,
Okay.
and yeah, typically the buyer provides that to the seller, and the seller will look at it and decide like, hey, yeah,
Okay.
that's kind of on par with how we feel about it. But at the same time, the buyer's going to pay what they want to pay. And so the seller may not always agree with every single line item on there, but they'll generally kind of give you some feedback, yay or nay, or like, hey, if it's a PDP deal, why are you allocating so much value to locations, or
Yeah.
vice versa? And so sometimes there's
Okay.
conversations had about that, but it's really just meant to avoid gamemanship, as far as like, hey, we're going to assign a long value to this one property because maybe we'll find
Okay.
defects. Ideally, you don't want situations like that, especially if you're the
Yeah.
seller.
So AOV is originated from the buyer, reviewed and essentially endorsed by the, I mean, sorry, AOV is assigned originally by the seller, and then it's reviewed and endorsed by the buyer.
No, yeah,
And then
you had it
once,
right. Basically
okay,
it's set by the buyer and then reviewed and
okay,
signed off on by the seller. Yeah.
okay, okay. All right. And then once that PSA signed, it's a done deal. It's locked
Yeah,
in, and
that
now you move forward.
yeah, that schedule is
Okay.
locked in, and then that's what is the basis of all your defects moving forward.
Okay. So Bryce, you
Yeah,
get an
I
AOV
wanted to ask a
schedule.
question like, what about the financing piece and how that brings in another allocation of value schedule sometimes? Often we'll see, the buyer's AV schedule, but then there's a separate bank one in the background that we're trying to help juggle and match to. And how much does that affect? How much does the financing piece affect the negotiation of all of that?
Yeah, it's a great question, Bryce, and something that you as a company and then your brokers need to be aware of from the beginning, because it's possible that your buyer AV with the seller is going to look different than your bank AVs. And maybe not always, but let's say the bank might give you more value for producing properties versus unproducing properties, whereas you as the buyer are allocating you certain values to undeveloped or unproducing properties. Probably the better way to say is undeveloped properties, where you're going to have locations. And so it's going to change the scope as far as what you need to hit from the company side, but then also make sure you can get your bank comfortable with on your debt financing side. Because your credit agreement with your bank, if you're financially part of the deal, they're going to want to make sure and see like, hey, due diligence was done on all of these properties that we have an allocated value to, or typically at least up to 80 or 90%, whatever you agree
Yeah.
to in your credit facility. So the last thing you want to happen is you're moving forward with your buyer seller AV, and the bank gives you their allocated value schedule later as far as how they valued the properties, and then you're scrambling with a week or two
At the
left saying,
end.
hey, we got to get due diligence done on X more number of properties or wells, leases, etc., to make sure we can get the bank comfortable by closing.
Yeah. Yeah. Bryce, let's talk about the importance of, it starts with that AB schedule.
Yeah.
All right. When you get that AB schedule, what's the first thing that you're doing from an organizational standpoint that kind of sets things in motion for the ultimately being able to get done within the 20-day window that essentially we have to do our work in a 30-day diligence?
Yeah, to us, it's what is the value allocated to? Is it wells? Is it leases? Is it units? Or something else? So we look at that first, and that kind of dictates how we organize information and how we start structuring what our workflow is going to look like. Is allocating value done on a single well or a unit that's a number of wells? Makes a big difference to us. Or is it purely a lease, or is it a mineral deal? How do we high grade our efforts? And then from there, I mean, it doesn't always happen, but most of the time clients will let us actually see the allocated value on a line item by line item schedule. And we'll go in and start doing the math and double checking the math and making sure if it's 80-20 or the bank requires 90% or 95%, that we've organized and we'll work through those from a top-down perspective. And from there, it's tie all the different pieces of the schedules together. If it's a well-based diligence for the files organized by units, we have to have some sort of organizational crossover. What leases go to what wells, which go to what units. It's building out kind of a master workbook of information that we could use to flow everything. And when we say he's got a 10% variance on working interest on well, what all is impacted by that? And how is that affected?